Lily and Rose grew up in the same small town where everyone knew each other. Their friendship began on a rainy Monday morning in their college cafeteria when they'd both reached for the last blueberry muffin. Instead of arguing over it, they split it in half, and that simple act of sharing sparked a friendship that would last for decades. They were complete opposites. Lily was outgoing and loved being the center of attention, while Rose was quieter and preferred staying in with a good book. But somehow, their differences made their friendship stronger. They balanced each other perfectly, like two pieces of a puzzle that just fit. Throughout college, they shared everything. Late-night study sessions fueled by countless cups of coffee, tears over failed relationships, and dreams about their future. Lily wanted to become a successful businesswoman, while Rose dreamed of opening her own little bookstore. They made a pact to always be there for each other, no matter what life threw their way. After graduation, while most friends drifted apart, Lily and Rose's bond only grew stronger. They moved into a tiny apartment together in the city, sharing a space barely big enough for their dreams. Those early days were filled with instant noodles, second-hand furniture, and endless laughter as they figured out adult life together. Rose met David at a local coffee shop where she worked part-time. He was a regular customer who always ordered the same thing: a plain black coffee and a chocolate croissant. He was charming in an understated way, with kind eyes and a gentle smile that made Rose's heart skip a beat. Lily watched from the sidelines as their love story unfolded, genuinely happy for her best friend's happiness. The wedding was small but perfect, held in Rose's parents' backyard. Lily stood beside Rose as her maid of honor, holding back tears as she watched her best friend start a new chapter of her life. She helped plan every detail, from the wildflower centerpieces to the homemade wedding cake that took 3 attempts to get right. When Rose found out she was pregnant, Lily was the first person she told, even before David. They cried together in the bathroom, staring at the positive pregnancy test. Throughout the pregnancy, Lily was there for every craving, every doctor's appointment, and every moment of doubt. She painted the nursery, assembled the crib, and spent countless hours helping Rose prepare for motherhood. Their son Alex was born on a stormy night in October. Lily paced the hospital hallways for hours, more nervous than David seemed to be. When she finally held Alex in her arms, she felt a low she hadn't expected. He wasn't her child, but he might as well have been. She became Aunt Lily, the fun-loving, slightly crazy aunt who spoiled him rotten. As the years passed, their friendship evolved but never weakened. They adapted to the changes in their lives. Rose balancing motherhood with finally opening her dream bookstore, and Lily climbing the corporate ladder. Every Sunday, they had dinner together, a tradition that became sacred. David would cook his famous lasagna while Alex told stories about school, and the two friends would share a bottle of wine and catch up on their lives. They were there for each other through everything. When Rose's father passed away, when Lily's business venture failed, when Alex broke his arm falling from a tree. Their friendship was the kind others envied, the kind that seemed unbreakable. They finished each other's sentences, knew each other's coffee orders by heart, and could communicate with just a look. To the outside world, they were the perfect example of lifelong friendship. Rose and David's home became Lily's second home. She had her own key, her own coffee mug, and even her own drawer in the guest room. Alex grew up considering her as much a part of the family as his own parents. But beneath the surface of this perfect friendship, something was changing. It started so subtly that no one noticed at first, not even Lily herself. The way she looked at David a second too long, how she began to imagine herself in Rose's place, how her heart would race when David gave her a friendly hug. The dinners became more frequent, and Lily found more reasons to stop by their house. She'd bring Alex gifts just because, help David with house projects when Rose was busy at the bookstore, and always made sure to be available whenever the family needed anything. She told herself she was just being a good friend, the same way she'd always been. Their photo albums were filled with countless memories, birthday celebrations, holiday gatherings, beach trips, and quiet moments at home. In almost every picture, Lily was there, part of their family photos, their Christmas cards, their life. She was woven so deeply into the fabric of their lives that it seemed impossible to imagine one without the other. Rose would often tell people, "Lily isn't just my best friend, she's my sister. We chose each other." She trusted Lily completely, shared her deepest fears and wildest dreams with her. They had inside jokes that no one else understood, secret signals they developed over years of friendship, and the ability to know when the other needed support without a word being spoken. They celebrated their 20-year friendship anniversary with a weekend trip to the beach, just the two of them, like old times. They stayed up late, drinking wine and reminiscing about their college days, laughing until their sides hurt. Rose told Lily how grateful she was to have her in her life, how she couldn't imagine doing life without her best friend by her side. The last photo they took together was at Alex's 13th birthday party. Rose and Lily stood side by side, arms around each other, bright smiles on their faces. Rose wore her favorite blue dress, the one Lily had helped her pick out for her anniversary dinner with David. No one looking at that photo could have guessed what was brewing beneath the surface of their perfect friendship. That's how the story began, with two friends who seemed inseparable, a friendship that appeared unbreakable, and a family that was about to be torn apart. No one could have predicted how their story would unfold, how betrayal would creep in like a shadow, or how the bonds of friendship would be tested in ways they never imagined. The signs were there, hidden in plain sight, in the lingering glances, the subtle changes in behavior, the small shifts in dynamics. But love and trust can sometimes blind us to the truth, even when it's right in front of our eyes. And so their story continued, moving inexorably toward a conclusion that would shake their world to its core. Looking back, the changes in Lily's behavior started small, like ripples in a quiet pond. She began spending more time in front of the mirror before their Sunday dinners, carefully choosing her outfits and wearing the perfume she knew David once complimented. Her laugh would grow a bit louder when he told jokes, and her eyes would follow him around the room when she thought no one was watching. At first, even Lily didn't recognize these feelings for what they were. She told herself she was just appreciating how good David was to her best friend, how wonderful he was as a father to Alex. But late at night, alone in her apartment, she'd catch herself daydreaming about what it would be like to be in Rose's place, to be the one David came home to every night. The turning point came during Rose and David's 15th wedding anniversary party. Lily had helped plan everything, making sure every detail was perfect. She'd spent weeks organizing the surprise celebration, coordinating with family and friends, all while pushing down the growing ache in her chest. That night, she wore a red dress that made heads turn, and for the first time, she noticed David looking at her differently. During the party, Rose asked Lily to give a speech. Standing there, glass in hand, Lily talked about their friendship, about watching Rose and David fall in love, about being there for all their important moments. Her voice cracked slightly when she said, "You two are perfect for each other." Only she knew the real reason for her tears wasn't joy. The obsession grew like ivy on a wall, slowly, steadily, until it covered everything. Lily started finding reasons to visit their house when she knew Rose would be busy at the bookstore. She'd bring over Alex's favorite snacks or offer to help David with household projects. Each interaction, each small moment of connection, fed the growing darkness in her heart. She began keeping a secret journal, filling pages with thoughts she could never share. She wrote about David's smile, about how their hands brushed accidentally while doing dishes after Sunday dinner, about how she imagined their life could be. The journal became her confessor, the only place she could be honest about her feelings. Her own relationship suffered. When friends tried to set her up on dates, she'd find reasons to cancel. "I'm too busy," she'd say, or "I'm focusing on my career right now." But the truth was, no one measured up to David in her mind. She'd compare every man to him and find them wanting. The holidays became particularly difficult. Watching Rose and David exchange loving glances across the dinner table, seeing them kiss under the mistletoe, each moment was like a small knife in her heart. Yet she kept showing up, unable to stay away, trapped in the orbit of their perfect family life. Lily started noticing things about Rose that had never bothered her before. The way she sometimes interrupted David when he was talking, how she didn't appreciate his cooking enough, how she was often too busy with the bookstore to attend Alex's school events. Lily found herself keeping mental notes of every small imperfection in their marriage, every tiny crack she could find. She became an expert at maintaining her facade. To the outside world, she was still the devoted best friend, the loving aunt, the trustworthy confidant. She listened patiently when Rose shared her marital concerns, all while imagining how she would handle those situations differently. She comforted David when he was stressed about work, secretly thrilling at every moment of emotional intimacy. The guilt would come in waves, usually late at night. She'd remember all the years of friendship, all the times Rose had been there for her, all the trust placed in her. Sometimes she'd cry herself to sleep, hating herself for these feelings she couldn't control. But by morning, the obsession would be back, stronger than ever. She started creating scenarios in her head where she and David could be together. Maybe Rose would meet someone else. Maybe she'd want to move away for her business. Maybe she'd realize they'd grown apart. Lily knew these thoughts were wrong, but she couldn't stop them from coming. Her apartment walls became a gallery of family photos, mostly group shots where she could crop out Rose and pretend it was her family. She'd stare at these pictures for hours, imagining a different life. She knew it was unhealthy, but the fantasy had become her comfort, her escape from reality. The weekly family dinners became both torture and pleasure. She'd watch David move around the kitchen, memorizing his habits, how he'd hum while cooking, the way he'd roll up his sleeves, how he took his coffee. Each detail was precious to her, fuel for her growing obsession. Alex noticed changes in his aunt's behavior, though he couldn't quite put his finger on what was different. Sometimes he'd catch her staring at his dad with an expression he didn't understand. Other times, she seemed distant when his mom was talking, lost in her own thoughts. Lily started making subtle suggestions to Rose about their marriage. "Don't you think David seems unhappy sometimes? Or maybe he needs more appreciation." She plants small seeds of doubt, all while positioning herself as the supportive friend who just wanted them to be happy. Her world began to revolve entirely around their family. She turned down promotions that would require her to move, cancelled vacations that would take her away for too long, and gradually distanced herself from other friends. Her life became a careful choreography of being close to David while maintaining the appearance of normalcy. The dangerous thoughts came more frequently now. She'd imagine accidents, illnesses, anything that might remove Rose from the picture. These thoughts terrified her, made her question who she'd become, but they wouldn't go away. The line between right and wrong began to blur in her mind, twisted by years of suppressed desires and growing obsession. The annual hiking trip had been their tradition for 15 years. Every spring, Rose and Lily would pack their bags and head to the mountains, just the two of them, like they'd done since college. This year was different, though. Lily spent months planning it, but not in the way she used to. She learned about Rose's inheritance accidentally. One evening, while helping organize papers in Rose's home office, she found the letter from Rose's aunt's lawyer. The amount was substantial, enough to secure Alex's college future and then some. The discovery sparked something dark in Lily's mind, something she couldn't shake. The weeks leading up to the hiking trip were filled with careful preparation. Lily spent hours researching the trail, studying maps, and reading about the area's weather patterns. She told herself she was just being thorough, being a good friend, making sure they'd be safe. But deep down, she knew different. Rose was excited about the trip. She'd been stressed with the bookstore's expansion and needed a break. Just like old times, she kept saying, not knowing how those words made Lily's stomach twist with guilt. They planned to take the more challenging trail this year, Rose's idea, ironically. The morning of the hike dawned clear and crisp. Lily picked Rose up early, thermos of coffee ready, just like always. They chatted during the drive, Rose talking about David's recent promotion and Alex's upcoming school play. Lily smiled and nodded, her backpack feeling heavy with more than just hiking gear. They started the trail in high spirits. The spring flowers were blooming, and the air was fresh with pine. They took pictures at the trailhead, arms around each other, smiling. Rose looked beautiful that day, her cheeks pink from the cool morning air, her hair catching the sunlight. Lily pushed away the whisper of doubt in her mind. As they climbed higher, Rose shared her plans for the bookstore's new children's section. She was so animated, so full of life and dreams. She talked about the reading programs she wanted to start, the community she hoped to build. Lily listened, memorizing her friend's voice, trying not to think about what was to come. They stopped for lunch at a scenic overlook. Rose had packed their favorite sandwiches, turkey and avocado for Lily, chicken salad for herself. They sat on a fallen log, legs dangling over the edge, looking out at the valley below. Rose pulled out her phone to take a selfie, wanting to send it to David and Alex. The moment came after lunch. They were approaching the steepest part of the trail, where it curved around the mountain's edge. Rose was leading, just a few steps ahead. She stopped to adjust her bootlaces, kneeling down near the edge. Lily stood behind her, heart pounding. What happened next was quick. A simple push was all it took. Rose didn't even have time to scream. The sound of tumbling rocks and branches filled the air, then silence. Lily stood there frozen, staring at the spot where her best friend had been just moments before. She waited several minutes, counting them in her head, before she started screaming for help. She called emergency services, her voice breaking with what sounded like panic and grief. She told them how Rose had slipped, how she tried to grab her but couldn't reach her in time. The words came easily, rehearsed in her mind countless times. The search and rescue team arrived within an hour. They found Rose's body at the bottom of the ravine. The fall had been severe. Lily sat wrapped in a shock blanket, tears streaming down her face. The sheriff praised her for keeping calm enough to give them clear directions to their location. She was the one who called David. The hardest phone call she ever made, she told the police later. She could still hear his broken sob when she closed her eyes. Alex was at a friend's house when he got the news. Lily insisted on being the one to pick him up to bring him home. She held him while he cried, guilt and triumph warring in her heart. The following days were a blur of activity. Lily never left David's side, handling the funeral arrangements, taking care of Alex, managing the flood of relatives and well-wishers. She was the perfect picture of the grieving best friend, the supportive family member stepping up in a crisis. The investigation was brief. The trail was known to be dangerous, and accidents weren't uncommon. Lily's story was convincing. She'd always been good at details. The weather had been clear, but the ground was still damp from recent rains. No one questioned it too deeply. At the funeral, Lily gave a touching eulogy. She spoke about their friendship, their years together, all the memories they'd shared. Her voice cracked at all the right moments. People whispered about how strong she was, how lucky the family was to have her. David squeezed her hand when she returned to the seat. The weeks after the funeral were crucial. Lily knew she had to be patient, had to play her role perfectly. She helped David with the insurance paperwork, spent time with Alex, kept the house running smoothly. She became indispensable, the rock they both leaned on. Late at night, alone in her apartment, she'd take out the journal where she'd planned everything. Reading through her careful notes, she felt a mix of horror and satisfaction. The person who wrote those pages seemed like a stranger now, yet here she was, watching her plans unfold exactly as she'd hoped. The inheritance came through quickly. Rose had updated her will recently, leaving everything to David and Alex. Lily helped David sort through the paperwork, watching as he struggled to focus through his grief. She was careful never to mention money, never to seem too interested in the practical aspects of Rose's death. As spring turned to summer, Lily's carefully constructed world began to take shape. The foundation was laid, built on the worst thing she'd ever done. But looking at David across the kitchen table, watching Alex slowly begin to smile again, she told herself it would be worth it. She would make it worth it. The hiking gear stayed packed away in her closet, never to be used again. Sometimes, in the quiet moments before sleep, she could still hear the sound of falling rocks, still see Rose's last unsuspecting smile. But those moments grew fewer and further between as time passed and her new reality solidified. 1 year after Rose's death, life had settled into a new routine. Lily had carefully orchestrated her presence in David and Alex's lives, becoming more essential with each passing day. She managed the bookstore occasionally, helped Alex with homework, and made sure dinner was ready when David came home from work, all while maintaining the perfect image of a devoted friend helping a grieving family. The transformation happened so gradually that nobody noticed. She started staying later after dinner, finding reasons to be there in the morning. Her clothes slowly migrated into Rose's old closet, justified by the excuse of having a change of clothes handy for emergencies. The neighbors grew used to seeing her car in the driveway. David began relying on her more and more. She was there when the coffee maker broke at 6 a.m., when Alex needed a last-minute costume for the school play, when the roof leaked during a storm. Each crisis, each small moment of need, pulled her deeper into their lives. she became irreplaceable. The first time David reached for her hand wasn't during a dramatic moment. They were washing dishes after dinner, a quiet Sunday evening. Alex was upstairs doing homework. Their fingers brushed as she passed him a plate to dry, and instead of pulling away, he held on for just a moment. The look they shared said everything neither dared to speak. That touch opened a door that couldn't be closed. Small moments began to multiply. A lingering hug here, a meaningful glance there. David would find reasons to touch her shoulder when passing by, and she'd bring him coffee just the way he liked it without being asked. They were dancing around something inevitable. Alex noticed the change in dynamics before anyone else. He'd watch them move around the kitchen together, observe how his dad's eyes followed Lily when she walked through a room. Sometimes he'd mention his mom, and a heavy silence would fall over the table. Lily would quickly change the subject, her smile just a little too bright. The town began to whisper. It started with concerned glances at the grocery store, hushed conversations at school events. "Isn't it too soon?" they'd murmur. "What about poor Rose?" But Lily held her head high, played her part perfectly. The selfless friend who just wanted to help a grieving family heal. Their first kiss happened in the garden Rose had loved so much. Lily had been helping David pull weeds, trying to keep Rose's beloved flowers alive. He'd looked at her, dirt on his cheek, and suddenly the space between them disappeared. Later, they'd both say it just happened naturally, as if they had no choice in the matter. The guilt came in waves for David. Lily would find him looking at old photos late at night, tears in his eyes. She'd comfort him, tell him Rose would want him to be happy to move forward. Each time, she'd hold him until the guilt passed, securing her place in his heart a little more firmly. Alex's reaction to their relationship was complicated. At 14, he was old enough to understand, but young enough to still be hurt and confused. He'd alternate between accepting Lily's increased presence and shutting himself in his room for hours. She tried to give him space while staying close enough to catch him if he fell. Their first public appearance as a couple was at a school function. They didn't plan it, but when David automatically reached for her hand, neither pulled away. The looks they received ranged from sympathy to judgment, but they stood together, united against the world's opinion. Lily felt both triumphant and terrified. Rose's parents were the hardest to face. They'd loved Lily like a second daughter, but now they could barely look at her. At family gatherings, the tension was palpable. Lily would catch Rose's mother watching her with an unreadable expression, and her father would find reasons to leave the room when she entered. The bookstore became a point of contention. Some regular customers stopped coming when they heard about David and Lily's relationship. Others defended them, saying life must go on. Lily spent hours rearranging shelves that Rose had organized, slowly making the space her own while trying to preserve what Rose had built. David proposed on a quiet evening at home. No fancy restaurant, no elaborate plans, just the two of them in the kitchen after Alex had gone to bed. He said he couldn't imagine life without her now, that she'd brought light back into their world. Lily cried real tears as she said yes, though perhaps not for the reasons he thought. Planning the wedding was a delicate balance. They kept it small, respectful, nothing like the joyous celebration Rose's wedding had been. Lily chose a simple dress, different in every way from Rose's lace gown that still hung in the back of the closet. They decided to have the ceremony in a different venue, away from the memories of the past. Alex agreed to be part of the wedding, though his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Lily bought him a new suit, took him for ice cream, tried to make the day special for him too. She told him she would never try to replace his mother, that Rose would always be part of their family. She almost believed it herself. The night before the wedding, Lily couldn't sleep. She stood in front of her mirror, rehearsing her vows, when she caught a glimpse of Rose's photo on the dresser. For a moment, she thought she saw accusation in those frozen eyes. She turned the photo face down, but the weight of what she'd done seemed heavier than ever. The wedding day arrived with perfect weather, sunny but not too hot, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of spring flowers. As Lily walked down the aisle toward David, she saw everything she'd wanted coming true. She was finally taking her place in the family she'd coveted for so long. The price she'd paid seemed distant now, like a bad dream fading in the morning light. After the honeymoon, Lily wasted no time making the house truly hers. She started small, rearranging furniture, buying new curtains, changing the color scheme in the kitchen. Each change erased a little more of Rose's presence, like slowly painting over an old canvas. The first major change came when she packed up Rose's clothes. "It's time," she told David gently, watching his face for any sign of resistance. She made a show of donating everything to charity, though she kept one box hidden away, evidence she might need someday, though she didn't let herself think too deeply about why. Alex watched these changes with quiet anger. When Lily replaced his mom's favorite armchair with a modern one, he refused to sit in the living room for a week. When she rearranged the family photos, putting wedding pictures of her and David in prominent places, Alex turned them face down when he thought no one was looking. The bookstore underwent a transformation too. Lily implemented new systems, changed the layout, added a coffee bar. The regulars who'd known Rose complained about the changes, but Lily stood firm. "We need to move forward," she'd say, her smile never wavering. Sales improved, which made it harder for anyone to argue. David threw himself into his work, spending longer hours at the office. Maybe he was avoiding the changes at home, or maybe he just needed the distraction. Lily didn't mind. It gave her more time to reshape their world according to her vision. She redecorated Alex's room without asking, claiming she wanted to surprise him with a more grown-up space. The real problem started when Alex began asking questions about his mother's death. He'd grown quieter, more observant. Lily would catch him studying her when he thought she wasn't looking. He spent hours on his computer, though he'd quickly close it whenever she entered his room. One evening, Alex mentioned something odd about the hiking trail where his mother died. "Mom knew those trails better than anyone," he said during dinner. "She'd never make the mistake they said she made." Lily's hand shook slightly as she passed the salt, but her voice remained steady as she changed the subject. Tensions in the house grew. Alex started coming home late from school, making excuses to skip family dinners. When he did join them, the silence was heavy with unasked questions. Lily tried to win him over with his favorite meals, new video games, anything she thought might help, but the distance only grew. The breaking point came when Alex found Rose's old journal hidden in the attic. He discovered entries about the inheritance, about Rose's plans to expand the bookstore, about her dreams for Alex's future. The way she described these plans didn't match the story Lily had told about Rose's state of mind before the accident. Lily noticed Alex spending more time with his maternal grandparents. They'd have long conversations in hushed tones that stopped whenever she entered the room. She started finding printed articles about hiking accidents in his room, maps of the trail where Rose died, weather reports from that day. She tried to talk to David about Alex's behavior, painting it as typical teenage rebellion. "He's just having a hard time adjusting," she'd say, rubbing David's shoulders. "Maybe he needs counseling." But David seemed distracted, lost in his own thoughts. Sometimes she'd catch him looking at her strangely, as if seeing her for the first time. The atmosphere in the house became suffocating. Every family photo seemed to mock them. Every shared meal felt like a performance. Alex started recording conversations on his phone, though he tried to hide it. Lily knew because she'd gone through his room while he was at school, her heart racing as she discovered his growing collection of evidence. One night, she overheard Alex on the phone with someone, discussing hiking accidents and investigation procedures. She stood outside his door, her blood running cold as she listened to him ask detailed questions about how to reopen a closed case. That night, she couldn't sleep, planning her next move. The situation called for decisive action. Lily began suggesting to David that Alex's behavior was becoming concerning, even dangerous. She planted seeds of doubt about his mental state, hinting at the need for serious intervention. "I'm worried about him," she'd say, her voice trembling with manufactured concern. "He seems obsessed with Rose's death. It's not healthy." She started finding disturbing things in Alex's room. Angry journal entries, dark web searches, anything that might make him seem unstable. She was careful to let David discover these things himself, playing the role of the concerned stepmother who only wanted to help. The final straw was when she staged a confrontation. She provoked Alex until he lost his temper, making sure David was there to witness his son's outburst. The look of hurt and confusion on Alex's face as his father sided with Lily was almost enough to make her feel guilty. Almost. The final straw was when she staged a confrontation. She provoked Alex until he lost his temper, making sure David was there to witness his son's outburst. The look of hurt and confusion on Alex's face as his father sided with Lily was almost enough to make her feel guilty. Almost. The decision to send Alex away came after weeks of carefully orchestrated tension. Lily had planted enough doubt in David's mind about his son's mental state that when she suggested a boarding school specializing in troubled teens, he reluctantly agreed. "It's for his own good," she whispered, holding David as he struggled with the decision. The morning they told Alex was charged with emotion. He sat at the kitchen table, still in his pajamas, looking smaller than his 15 years. When David explained their decision, Alex's face went through a range of emotions: shock, betrayal, and finally, a cold understanding that made Lily uncomfortable. "You're choosing her over me," Alex said quietly, looking directly at his father. "Mom would never have done this." The words hung in the air like smoke. David started to respond, but Lily stepped in, her voice gentle but firm. "This isn't about choosing sides, Alex. We're trying to help you." Alex refused to pack his own bags. He sat on his bed, watching as Lily folded his clothes into suitcases. She tried to make conversation, talking about the school's excellent facilities, the therapeutic programs, the fresh start he'd have. He remained silent, his eyes following her every move with an intensity that made her nervous. Before they left for the school, Alex asked to visit his mother's grave. David agreed, thinking it might help provide closure. At the cemetery, Alex knelt by the headstone while Lily and David waited by the car. They couldn't hear what he whispered, but Lily saw him place something small and metallic by the flowers. A key she later realized was missing from her desk drawer. The drive to the school was long and silent. Alex stared out the window, headphones on, completely shutting them out. Lily kept her hand on David's knee, offering silent support. She caught Alex watching this gesture in the rearview mirror, his expression unreadable. The school looked more like a prison than an educational institution, despite its carefully maintained grounds and modern facilities. As they walked through the admission process, Alex remained eerily calm. It was only when they were saying goodbye that he spoke directly to Lily. "I know what you did," he said softly, so only she could hear. "And I'm going to prove it." The drive home was harder than Lily expected. David was quiet, lost in his own thoughts. She tried to comfort him, reminding him they'd made the right decision, that Alex needed help they couldn't provide at home. But something had shifted between them, a subtle change she couldn't quite identify. Back at the house, Alex's absence was like a physical presence. His empty room seemed to accuse them. David started spending more time there, sitting on Alex's bed, looking through old photo albums. Lily would find him asleep surrounded by pictures of Rose and Alex, their smiling faces a reminder of the family she'd broken apart. The first few weeks were the hardest. Alex refused their phone calls, returned their letters unopened. The school counselor reported that he was uncooperative but not disruptive. He spent most of his time in the library, she said, doing research. Something about that detail made Lily's skin crawl. David threw himself into work even more, coming home later and later. When he was home, he was distant, distracted. Lily tried everything to recapture their earlier happiness, cooking his favorite meals, planning romantic evenings, suggesting weekend getaways. But something had broken between them, hairline cracks spreading like ice on a pond. The community's reaction was mixed. Some supported their decision, praising them for getting Alex help. Others whispered about how quickly Lily had moved to send him away. Rose's parents were openly hostile now, refusing to speak to either of them. They started making weekly visits to Alex at the school. Lily started finding traces of Alex's investigation in his room, hidden notebooks, printed emails, newspaper clippings about hiking accidents. Each discovery sent a chill down her spine. She destroyed what she found, but couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing something important. The school called one day to report that Alex had been caught trying to mail a package to a private investigator. They'd confiscated it, but the incident raised concerns about his obsessive behavior. Lily used this to convince David that they'd made the right choice, while privately wondering what evidence the package had contained. As autumn turned to winter, Lily thought she'd finally won. Alex was safely away, David was slowly accepting their new reality, and she had everything she'd wanted. But sometimes, late at night, she'd wake to find David watching her with an expression she couldn't read. "You remind me of someone," he said once, and she knew he wasn't talking about Rose. The careful world she'd built was starting to show cracks. Small things at first. A missing journal here, a suspicious phone call there. She began to feel watched, even in her own home. Sometimes she'd catch glimpses of familiar faces in town, people who knew Rose, people who might remember details about that hiking trip. The truth began unraveling on a rainy Tuesday morning. Lily was at the bookstore when she noticed an unfamiliar man browsing the shelves. He wasn't reading the book titles, he was watching her. Later, she found his business card on the counter. He was a private investigator. That same week, small things started disappearing from the house. Rose's old hiking boots, photos from the trip, Lily's journal. She searched everywhere but couldn't find them. David said nothing, but she noticed him making phone calls from his car, speaking in hushed tones. Alex's school reported that his behavior had improved dramatically. He was participating in activities, making friends. This should have been good news, but it made Lily uneasy. She knew Alex wasn't the type to give up easily. The quiet felt like the calm before a storm. The first solid piece of evidence emerged when Rose's old hiking backpack was found. A local climber discovered it wedged between rocks, far from where the accident supposedly happened. Inside was Rose's camera, still working, protected by its waterproof case. The police called it a routine follow-up, but Lily saw the way they studied her face. David started asking questions about that day, small details he'd never bothered with before. What time had they started the hike? Which trail had they taken? Why had Rose's emergency beacon never activated? Lily's carefully constructed story began to show inconsistencies. One evening, she came home to find David in the study, surrounded by papers, weather reports from the day of the hike, trail maps, old police statements. The look he gave her made her blood run cold. "The rangers say that section of trail had safety rails," he said quietly. "You told the police there weren't any." The investigation reopened officially after Alex worked with his grandparents to hire a forensic expert. The expert's report highlighted inconsistencies in the original investigation, the angle of the fall, the position where Rose was found, the marks on her clothing. Each detail pointed to something more sinister than an accident. Lily's past came under scrutiny. Investigators discovered her obsessive journal entries hidden in a safety deposit box. They'd found emails she'd written to herself, planning every detail of her new life with David. The evidence painted a picture of a woman consumed by jealousy and desire. The final piece fell into place when Alex revealed what he'd found in the attic, Rose's phone. It contained a video from the morning of the hike, showing Rose excited about her plans for the bookstore's expansion. She looked happy, confident, nothing like the depressed, distracted woman Lily had described to police. David confronted her late one night after receiving a call from the detective. He'd been shown evidence that was impossible to ignore. Photos, documents, witness statements that contradicted her story. "Tell me it's not true," he begged, but Lily's silence said everything. The arrest happened quietly, early on a Sunday morning. Neighbors watched through their windows as police cars pulled up to the house. Lily walked out with her head held high, still believing she could explain everything away. But the weight of evidence was too heavy to bear. Alex returned home the day after the arrest. He walked through the house, touching things that had been moved or changed in his absence. In his room, he found everything exactly as he'd left it. Lily hadn't dared change anything after he'd gone. His investigation board was still hidden behind his posters, containing all the pieces that had finally come together. The trial was brief but intense. The prosecution presented a clear timeline of events, the planning, the execution, the cover-up. Lily's own words, written in her journals, condemned her. The jury took less than a day to reach their verdict. Rose's parents held each other and wept as justice was finally served. David and Alex began the slow process of healing. They moved to a new house, away from the memories. The bookstore was restored to Rose's original vision, with Alex taking a keen interest in its operation. Together, they found ways to keep Rose's memory alive while building a new future. Years later, Alex would sometimes visit his mother's grave, bringing fresh flowers and updates about his life. He'd tell her about college, about the bookstore, about healing his relationship with his father. And sometimes he'd thank her for giving him the strength to uncover the truth. The story of Rose's death and Lally's deception became a cautionary tale in their small town. It taught people that sometimes the most dangerous threats come from those closest to us, wearing the mask of friendship and love. But it also showed the power of a son's love for his mother and his unwavering determination to uncover the truth. David never remarried. Instead, he focused on rebuilding his relationship with Alex and honoring Rose's memory. The bookstore became a gathering place for the community, just as Rose had always wanted. And in the children's section, a small plaque bore her favorite quote, "The truth may be hidden, but it cannot be changed." The end wasn't just about justice being served, it was about a family finding their way back to each other, about truth prevailing over deception, and about a son's unwavering faith in his mother's memory. Some stories don't have happy endings, but they have right ones. This was one of those stories. The end.